Welcome everybody back to Veil of Sound. It's our regular Sunday interview, and I'm very, very happy to have Emil Amos here on the show. And if anybody asks Emil who, then I'll only give you the name of one of his and probably the most important band that he's ever been in, Grails. So Emil, thanks for joining.
Good to see you.
Yes, and I have a question right away as I listen to the new record. I love the new record. It's really cool. But could it be that Grails is more into film music nowadays than you have ever been?
Yeah, it could be. I think back in, let's say, 2007 or 8, that was when I was starting to work on that DVD that we made called Acid Rain. And at that point, that's where it was actually a daily religion for me. I really thought about nothing else. And I would go to the library. I had these weird ideas at the time that I would make the entire Grails DVD out of public items available at the library only. So I guess I was poor. I can't remember exactly what I was thinking, but I was going to the library and just cutting clips and collaging. And it's a hypnotic universe. I think first getting the power to really play with visual imagery with music, it's very addictive and kind of it's transporting. And if you really want to go down that hole, like, you can disappear and not really live up on the normal in the normal world. So back then, I would say, was my height of really caring and thinking and digging, and I spent so much time digging. It was just an obsession. And even then, later, around 2013, I moved to New York, and I was kind of bummed out that I felt like the promotional video culture around bands had caught up to me, and a lot of people started damaging their video in the same way that I'd been doing. And I felt kind of like there wasn't anything new. I was thinking about quitting making videos because a lot of my stuff was influenced by early skate videos, and a lot of the people doing the stuff in the 2010s weren't influenced by anything. They were just trying to push and sell things, and I didn't want to look like them, and I was kind of disturbed by the whole thing. So I was going to quit, but then I moved to New York, and in Union Square, and there's still a guy that does this. If you're ever in Manhattan, if you go to Union Square on some days, they have this fair around the perimeter, and there's a dude that sits at a table, and he has these little colored wallets of DVDs that he illegally burned, and he just sells them from a table. And there was one guy that retired. There's still a guy doing it, but there was one guy that retired that sold just the most truly bizarre international, like, underground sea level porn stuff. And so that was like my final frontier, I think, as I would just buy the hell out of everything the guy had because it was cheap. And I'd go home and slice up the most awkward stuff from the porns that obviously wasn't sex, but was all the weird setup that made no sense and was very bizarre looking. And I was still very obsessed with digging. But then after that, I took a big break, and our music tastes got a little bit stranger. Obviously, we did the Lilacs thing for years, and we went into kind of beat making. And then I think now that we've kind of, the new record, inevitably is a summation of influences. It's a summation of all these things. And so when you're making a record, it by law has to be kind of well-rounded. It can't be a picture of one thing. So when we kind of sum it up, I think it just ended up having a lot of film elements to it because instrumental music by law is tied to this history. And a lot of these nerds out there that collect these records are really interested in how valuable they are, or how sought after they are because somebody else sampled them or something like that. But for me, I'm actually connected to the films. I actually really care about the films. A lot of people don't even watch these movies, honestly. But my relationship with like Last Wave is so deep. I've loved that movie for so long, and so when we needed a song title for Black Rain, we just drew on that. But I think that the film thing has always been there. But if you go all the way back to the beginning, we didn't. It really wasn't until like Burning Off Impurities, I think, when I started to realize, oh my God, like all of these composers in all these countries that have come way before us
Mm.
have done it all. And like, how can we possibly contribute to that language?
Mhm.
And I felt so intimidated. And so out of that great fear, out of that great respect, and just like kind of the sense that we couldn't contribute. I think our contributions came from that the depth of that fear, you
Mhm.
know, and like if you don't have that fear, if you don't really care about history, then you probably should not be issuing records. You probably shouldn't be because you really you sit with these people, you're on their shoulders and you're in a very deep relationship with them and they've given their lives completely before you.
Mhm.
If you have no interest, then you're probably just wasting someone else's time because you actually imagine you're just talking about yourself when we're all in this together.
Which is an interesting point because I still remember one of those huge public debates between Freddie from Madball and his brother Roger in Agnostic Front. And Roger was always like, you have to know the classics before you start making hardcore. And Freddie was like, no, I don't.
Mm.
And I guess you would more agree with Roger, right? You have to know your ancestors and your roots before you start.
I think, yeah, I think it's funny because I definitely listened to more Agnostic Front as a kid.
Me
But
too.
I think that, yeah, my ninth grade band covered, I guess it was Crucified or something. That's it. Probably every band covered that song. Anyway, um, I think that the problem with the Madball dude's argument is that, first of all, it's extremely pretentious and cocky without knowing it.
Mhm.
So you've got this attitude that like you alone have this great contribution that doesn't need to be in context. Well, that is fine. That's totally fine if you are Van Gogh. So
Yeah, that's true.
go ahead,
Yeah.
step up to the plate. You know, let's see. Are you really Van Gogh?
Mm.
And the chances are, just chances, you're probably not going to be Van Gogh, bro. And
Yeah.
so it's kind of he doesn't know that he's putting himself in the spotlight.
Yeah.
Sure, a lot of people think that guy is important, but a lot of people definitely don't. So it's like it's just completely relative at that point. And so that attitude of like, I am the true folk artist, I am the Jesus Christ of this sentiment that I bring to the
Mm.
world. That's just such a lofty thing. But here's the caveat though, is like if he really is the thing, then it completely makes
Yeah.
sense. It's fine.
If he's
If
like
you
Dylan,
bring
right?
yeah, right. If you bring that level of rawness and three-dimensionality and presentness and just raw, just interesting um sort of complexity, you know, to the world and you put it on a plate and you say, I don't need to know about anything else around me or before me, and you deliver and you knock that ball out of the fucking park, fine. That's great. I mean, that's what we all want to see. That's what every movie tries to like push on us in Hollywood. But like 99% of the time, you're not
Yeah.
Van Gogh, bro. So
No.
sit down and pay attention and learn.
Yeah, that's true. It's also, I think it's very difficult to become that point, that one secession where you can say everything up to here, that is this point, and everything afterwards is something different. Um, which is of course also why, I mean, like when I was young, I loved Nirvana to pieces. But I'm very happy that through Cobain and his very clear statement that we're not the inventors of anything, that I got to know the Pixies, or something like, I don't know, some King Diamond, some Metal Church, something like that. Even though it might have nothing to do with Nirvana, but it showed you, okay, so even he appreciates a lot of what has been before him. And I think that's a very, very difficult thing. Honestly, I think in the last 50 years, I mean, how many innovations musically have there been? Not a lot. Not a lot. But
Yeah.
let's get back to Grails.
Okay.
When I listen to the new record, and I love the openness of it, the, in a way, even kind of liberal approach to song building, to I don't want to say anything goes, but anything goes in a way that it all flows into each other. That's what I really love about the record. And then I came to think, this liberal approach, this openness. Would you consider Grails a political band? Because, with all that liberal ideas.
I mean, you might have more perspective on that than me, but I kind of agree with you. I've never really thought about it, but yeah, I think that there is some implications in there. I think that the reason why it really sounds like that is because a lot of the record, I mean, some of the ideas were written out in theory, but most of the record was kind of an improvisation experiment. And when you do, I think it's Charlie Parker, there's a very famous quote. It's a great quote that says, like, basically, all the best improv is structured, or it's this contradiction. It says that all the best spontaneity is within a shape that you've thought about and planned, And so when we improv to that level, if we go into a project like this, because you have to respect the audience to the degree that, like, you are making a record, you are compartmentalizing a statement. So when you put that pressure on yourself, inevitably on the back end, you're going to do a lot of cleanup. But the more cleanup that you sort of allow yourself to do, the more freedom you can give yourself in the front. So when we were in Georgia at my friend's house, the final song of the record, just as an example, is like, it's very long. It's like 12 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
None of it was written. There was a piano in the corner, and I walked over to it, and I don't know if I meant to look for kind of a 70s sort of sad, like, not Carpenters and not Wings, but this sort of like sad piano line. And we carved it out just right there on the spot. The song is extremely unplanned, but that relationship between giving yourself total freedom to carve something out that's going to take someone 12 minutes of their time, it's totally pretentious in a sense, but if you know that on the back end you're going to be able to clean it up until it feels necessary, until it feels like it's not insulting someone's time and someone's attention, and it can kind of dream along with you, but there's enough fine tuning done that it's a cleaner experience than what it really was like, how messy it really was.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think when you get into the accepting that that's what a record is, that produced that record, and that produced Grails to some degree, is that. And there are disadvantages to that in Blacktop Prophecies and things. We literally never know exactly where we're going, and that's not always great. You clean it up as well as you can, and then people have to kind of live with it. We all have to live with what we made. But I think that it's one way to respect the process that I think is very valid, because writing sheet music like Morricone did, as insanely perfect and visionary as his records are, there's still a certain tightness to them. There's still a certain kind of you're still trapped inside of the scenes to some degree. I mean, barely. Honestly, the guy is so good that there's almost it's so free flowing, but it is written, and so you're inside, the prison of the sheet music. So I think to some degree, you're totally right about this. There is some sort of liberal attitude, because if you really want to be literal about it, the liberal probably trusts Mother Nature more than the conservative, right?
Definitely.
So the liberal is trusting that things are going to work out if you trust the common man. The conservative is like, no, you can't trust the common man. That's why we need this many guns, because they're coming into my home, so I'm going to blow them all away. So there's definitely a liberal attitude, in the sense that you're sort of trusting that you're going to land on your feet, and you're just going to embrace everything in a kitchen sink mentality. You're going to embrace every element that falls into your record, because maybe it was just supposed to be there. So maybe, yeah, you might be right.
You have hinted at the process of self-editing. Now, what is also striking about the new record, whose title I cannot pronounce, I guess it's something like Anches and Maat, but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, how would you pronounce it?
I mean, I figure everything that an American says is incorrect. But I would say Anches in Maat. But, my friend who named the record, she lives in Switzerland, but she's actually a German, and she's an Egyptologist. So I don't know. I think she would say Anches in Maat.
Sounds a lot like Dutch to me. But anyway, so what I like about it is, or what struck me also, is that for the first time in a long while, you have produced a record which fits onto one LP. It's not spread across 3 or 4 LP, 3 or 4 vinyl sides. So that is something was that your wish, to make it a little shorter, to, I don't want to say make it a little bit more accessible, but just to cut it short?
As we were going along, the years were just going by. It took so long to just get the record into its mixing stage and complete it. And the record didn't really want to be what it was like 3 years ago. It wasn't fitting together correctly, and I was having to give up on it for a while, because I had all these other records, and I felt like they were making more sense to me. So when I came back to it over and over, it would change. And then it was Alex that really felt that it needed to be short, because I think he thinks, as a record collector, that the double record thing is a little bit, I think he was feeling like it was a little bit pretentious, and we've been doing it for so long. He was thinking that, more of a pop state of mind, like it was more respectful and efficient to try to like do the same thing in a shorter amount of time. And at first I didn't agree, because I just kind of like, I would say that my original understanding of music goes back to the Beatles when I was 2 years old, and in kind of a drug journey sense, the LP to me is something I definitely want to not know where I am in the LP. Like, I want to get so deep in the LP that I don't really know that I'm in the second song or the single, or I want to experience music like it's an atmosphere. So I was kind of hoping we would have a lot of material, but then as the years went by, he just ended up being right, because it was just taking too long to make it, and it wanted to be what it was in the end. It wanted to be this succinct thing that kind of implied so many different things. And I think that, going back to that Beatles thing and being 2 years old, I think that maybe our brains take a picture of what music is. You know, somewhere along the line, early on, we take a picture of the universe, and within that picture, there are so many different tiny details. And so like this record definitely sort of zooms in on tiny details from the picture of what you imagine music really is, you know. Maybe it was roller skating for your 6th birthday, you know, like there's all these little compartments, you know, or seeing an outdoor concert when you were 11 that you didn't think you liked, but now you think about all the time, you know. There's all these particular tiny influences. There's a ton of black influenced music like that like kind of bubbles out of Grails that like I think ends up being more visible than, you know, like it almost sounds like we listen to soul music a lot when sometimes it's just inside the fabric of our love of music. Sometimes the German influence comes to the forefront and it sounds extremely German, but we haven't been listening to German music. It's just that it was buried inside of the picture that we took earlier on.
When you speak about German music, I guess then you mean stuff like krautrock. I'm very sure you don't mean German folklore.
Yeah, no, I mean, we wouldn't be experienced enough to be able to draw on old German music that's, you know, over 100 years old or anything. We do really like this German band. Maybe you can help me pronounce it, but it's called like Branton Schnur. Do you know that one? It's BRATENSCHNURE, I think.
Oh, Bratenschnur. Bratenschnur.
Yeah. That was nice pronunciation.
Thank you.
They draw on old German, like on old folk forms. They kind of sample and reference like really old German folk music, and it's really cool. Unfortunately, we don't have the vocabulary. We're not as intimately in touch with that to be able to create that texture. But they create that texture really well. You should check them out. I can't remember what city they're from there exactly, but I think that we were sort of there's something really vague about this record. There's something very, very embryonic about the emotional field, and I think maybe from people's responses, that's a good thing. It's not too literal. Maybe it has something to do with being a little bit older. It's not really like you don't put your finger on like a certain measure and say, oh, that's my favorite part, so much as like it's just such a big picture of sound. And I think maybe there's something kind of more mature in a, you know, in a Stanley Kubrick way. It's like people can sit around and analyze like what the numbers on the doors in The Shining mean, but I don't care about that. I just care about the feeling. You know what I mean?
And then again, the other thing, what is interesting about the new record is it sounds like, how should I say? It sounds a little bit more like you watched not only the classical, let's say 70s and 80s movies, but that you also in some way looked at, let's say, softcore porn. Like Bilitis. Is that something where you said like, okay, that is so strange and yet in some ways so interesting to score such a strange movie? Is that something where you said like, oh yeah, that was something that I'm interested in, maybe not everybody in the band, but that you are interested in?
I mean, as an artist, you are addicted to finding opportunities, and you are obsessed with finding crevices of expression that were hard to open, you know? So it's like when you take acid, everything opens up to you. It's like you're given the key to all sorts of chemicals inside your brain you can't normally access, you
Yeah.
know? And when you listen to like really good softcore music, it gives you something you can't get anywhere else. There's something really special about the texture
That's true.
and the depth of softcore music. It's really special, and it doesn't mean it doesn't even necessarily need to be connected to sex or anything at all, but it is because that's what we are. You know, it's a different keyhole into the animal kingdom that is wildly necessary if you really want to embrace the human ability to translate life into music. And when you when you listen to like I was skating along yesterday listening to this Lilacs and Champagne song called Refractory Period yesterday. I was analyzing like what we used to do with plugins versus now, because back then we didn't use plugins. So it was interesting to me. But this song Refractory Period is like it's a total love letter to that feeling. It's an extreme obsessive love letter to all softcore music, and um, it there's a serotonin high inside of that particular color palette that it gives you, like those really soft powdery pinks and like light pale
Pastels.
purples, and but yeah, there's something so beautiful about that particular degraded kind of B movie texture that any intelligent person would identify those elements as some of the most beautiful textures in film history. So back in the day, in the 80s and things, we thought about Nancy Reagan, we thought about, you know, Tipper Gore, and we thought about these issues as being taboo. We thought about these things as being censored.
Yeah.
So they held a certain importance in culture. But fast forward to much later, it doesn't have anything to do so much with taboo as it has to do with a picture of reality that needs to be integrated so that we all can have a more well-rounded picture of our own lives, and you know, with honesty, kind of like examining whether it's Cannibal Holocaust or Jim Jones and the picture of all those dead people. It's like you can hide from it, that's fine, that's your right,
Yeah.
but our job is to go down into the feeling and like find what that sounds like, you know. So this is a job, this is an occupation to like pull all your curiosity down into these sort of secret musicologists like vocabularies and pull out all the power that these emotions kind of hide. So it's our obligation to get into these crevices.
Would you also say that for you yourself, it's kind of an obsession?
I think that like I built my life and my mind around this, and now I'm getting a little bit older. I can see that the time has gone by, and this is basically what I've done. Yeah, this is pretty much this is the thing that occupied all of my mind. And to anyone, you know, who doesn't even have any interest in it, I think they could probably see that it fulfilled a very practical purpose. Because if you go back to 2004, when we're landing in Berlin and we're playing over there for the first time, even then, when we didn't know what we were necessarily doing and we were finding our way, we were still seeing the world, learning, and doing the things that most people pretty much want to do, which is, you know, travel and see the world and understand more and satisfy their curiosity and expand their vocabulary and get better at what they do. So even if you're a businessman, you know, in a suit next to me on a plane and you're like wondering why people still play in a rock band or something, I think I could make the argument that like this curiosity and this obsession has taken me to the far ends of the earth, and I've gotten to do pretty much everything I've wanted to do. So even if it's not an incredibly secure lifestyle, it's been in some humble way successful enough, you know.
Also, of course, when we talk about Anches and Maat, we should talk about the fact that this is the first time that you as a band have been in a studio together in a long, long while. How was that feeling when you were in Atlanta?
It was great because years ago, the guy Aaron and Nancy, they run the studio and they live in the house, and so they became early friends of ours when we would play in Atlanta, and there was a familiarity there. They kind of feel like they're just part of the family. Like they've been to my mom's house. We're just friends on a very calm level, so that when you put yourself in a music studio with someone, you kind of forget you're recording.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why this record largely sounds the way it does in a lot of ways, is that we were in their house and we were relaxing.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we were sitting on the couch saying, why don't you try a G sharp right there? And why don't you hold your finger on that oscillator and keep going, like make it weirder for 3 more minutes? And why don't you like go get some food for the band? And why don't you, you know, it's
Mm-hmm.
like there was something about it that was so communal and relaxing and enjoyable that I think it translated to the performances. I don't think that the performances, for example, the drums on most Grails records, I don't think the drums are I don't think they're very impressive, because my mind on those days is never interested in pulling off the most crazy thing on drums. It's my mind is just completely compositionally aware of like, well, where is the chorus? Do we need to make sure the guy in the isolation room knows where the chorus is? Do I need to run over here and make sure that was an F sharp? You know, do I need to, you know, it's like I'm running around just trying to make sure the song becomes the thing that is in our minds. I'm not really interested in like wowing somebody on the drums or anything like that. So what I see in this record is a very holistic picture of a mood that we let ourselves explore.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we've done it in different ways so many times, and I think back to Deep Politics is probably one of the first times where it really felt like all of the genres could just completely bleed into each other just effortlessly. I guess maybe Burning Up Impurities does some of that, and Black Tar, but like there's something about letting yourself go there, that kind of total permission slip that Grails always gave ourselves, probably after seeing Jackie O Motherfucker and bands like that in the early days in 2000 and 2001 in Portland, and just thinking, you know, this is a new world. The 90s didn't really allow this level of freedom unless you were just strictly in the avant-garde. You'd have to completely be in the avant-garde. But in the opening of the 2000s, I think we realized people are going to let us do kind of anything.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't know what that meant yet, but that was, each record is a reflection of almost appreciating the license that the audience had given us.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were like, if you guys are going to let us do this and put the name on there and sell it, then we will go as far as we can to try to make this worth your time, you know?
Also interesting about the record is the sound. We have already spoken in depth about it, but what is striking is that it shows, at least in a certain way, it shows a connection between softcore and synthwave. Because of course there is a lot of synth on it. There are moments when it sounds like a perfect synth beat. So it shows this connection, and it's a little less post-rocky, you know, a little less into that direction. So, you know, we've said that before, and before we started recording this, the whole thing moves a little bit more into the doom jazz terrain, to the doom jazz area. And you've also mentioned that you've listened to stuff like Boren and the Club of Gore and stuff like that. So is that something where you say like, okay, that is for me like really good, influential post-millennium music, doom jazz?
I mean, I honestly don't know that anyone in the band has any records in their collection that actually fall under that category. So maybe it's an inadvertent relationship there, but that's okay. I mean, a lot of waves of technology and a lot of waves of styles happen simultaneously all the time because it's in the air and it's something that everybody is kind of feeling. But I think a lot of it is just when you know that you want to bass less around the guitar, when you know that you want to deprioritize the guitar because the guitar is just, it's too familiar. It just feels too easy to ignore, because we just heard it. Our brains are too used to it. So if you keep pulling the guitar out, you're going to end up with these kind of textures anyway. But I think that when we talk about synth or synth wave, I also feel a little bit of a danger that we're going to seem like we're excited about that trend, and I don't think we're really very excited about that trend. I think organically, the thing that me and Alex and probably the other guys too have been really like buying a lot of is like in the early 80s there was a lot of private sort of cassette culture, you know, like it could be early British four trackers, it could be insanely, you know, out there avant-garde pioneers like maybe Pascal Camelot, or there's a lot of like early tapers that just didn't really find much of an audience at all. And as collectors, inevitably we find that exciting because it means it's a whole new area that we weren't too familiar with. And everybody's kind of digging in this like early 80s zone because nobody really realized how much stuff there was there. A lot of that stuff is completely free and is completely exploratory because the person probably thought no one would ever hear it. So I think there's a level to which that early 80s mode, the early 80s mode was largely defined by all these new instruments, these new, you know, new home taping mechanisms, new synthesizers that you could afford. So because I think we listen to a lot of that stuff, there's some inevitable parallels to wanting to create those atmospheric zones. And I don't think that we sit around and get that excited about like synth bands or anything like that. But I think once you remove the guitar and you go back to kind of the last time that you felt culture was exploring a compositional corridor that you find the most interesting, then inevitably you are going to go back to a place where you sensed an emotional sentence hadn't been finished. You know what I mean? And you want to kind of see where that emotional sentence can go.
that is at least explaining a lot about one side of a record. And at the same time, I know that you didn't strive for it, but can you see that some of the arrangements that you did on the new record, that they are, and that's why I also came up with a jazz thing, that they are, in a way, they are very open, they're very bright, and very often in some of the songs, you have a moment when you feel as if there's a whole new world opening. And very often when I hear old jazz, old swing stuff from, let's say, the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, I have the same feeling, the same brightness, that sparkling thing in there.
Mm-hmm.
I know you don't strive for anything. You don't emulate anybody, but is that something where you say like, oh, I can see what you mean?
Oh yeah, all the horn parts, specifically. I mean, maybe some of the strings too, but that comes from the 70s when all of a sudden culture, because the 60s didn't allow it that much, but in the 70s, culture made space in the professional realm for extremely morbid music.
Yep.
Like the 70s was the first time you could really dial up a Saturday TV show and hear some of the most morose music you'd ever heard in your life. And it scarred you as a child. You didn't understand what it was even referencing, because if you're 8 or 9 years old, you've never felt those feelings yet. You've never had your brother die in front of you, or you've never been, kidnapped. None of this stuff has happened to you yet. And so when you hear the music that reflects the Saturday movie matinee about a kid getting kidnapped and then his brother dying in front of him, I mean, the music is what makes this heavy impression on you. In the 70s, it's the most sleazy, darkest, violent, disgusting new realm of musical vocabulary. And so, I mean, because it's such a raw reflection of a really depressing time after, Martin Luther King, the Kennedys were killed all in front of, American citizens, and you had nothing to believe in anymore. All your friends are ODing. The hippie dream didn't work, and some of your friends are going off to just blast coke all night and maybe try disco dancing to forget about everything. There is a sonic Venn diagram there that's so powerful that you could argue that when the 80s and 90s rolled on, we scaled back and we became more conservative. I mean, if you listen to fucking grunge music, it's much more conservative, clean, and boring than a lot of that 70s shit that's fucking super dark and disturbing. So I think that we all have those roots because of our ages. We all have the roots that go back to being born inside that decade. So we have this scar that's from experiencing a lot of that art. And like, I don't think within our lifetime we're never gonna live that down, because we were born of that sound, and that those particular horns that you're talking about, we did try to mix brighter because we're trying to like make different sounds, and I've always made things too dark, so I'm trying to push things brighter just as a practice for an experiment to see if it produces a different result. But the horns themselves, definitely, they are about emulating a feeling from the past. Whether it's, I mean, definitely jazz influenced for sure, but with the harmonies. I mean, there's this song. It was in Black Mirror, but there's a song "Bright Eyes" that Art Garfunkel sings. That around 2 a.m. at night when I'm trying to go to bed, I just cannot get it out of my head. it's driving me crazy, like literally feeling insane. And I can't, there's nothing I can do to get it out of my head. And that song epitomizes this feeling you're talking about from those horns and then that kind of that 70s nexus point. But give that song a listen because it haunts you. It really is disturbing. There's nothing in the 90s sonically, technologically that can even touch the contradiction and the darkness of that particular kind of 70s expression. There's something really off about it.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, I cannot have you on the show without also talking about one other band that you have been in that a lot of people love, and that's Ohm. So how is working with a guy like Al Cisneros? Easy?
It's totally different. I mean, because in Grails, I give myself license to say, I know what this needs to be. Listen to me and trust me, and this is going to land on this target. I can hit the bullseye, even though I'm in the dark. I know I'll get to the target. And in Ohm, I want to. My intention is to listen to Al and try to facilitate him doing that. So it's totally different. And in Ohm, I really feel like that if I'm doing my job well, then I'm listening to what he's hearing. So experientially, it's much different.
It's basically the total opposite, isn't it? Once you're a leader, once you're a follower.
Yeah, sometimes it's like the exact opposite experience in the sense that Al's saying something to me, and then I go to Grails and I find myself saying the same kind of thing and them reacting the same way. It's like there's a lot of mirrors between them, but overall, if you're a professional in theory artist, you're just there to make the work. It transcends all personal realms. I mean, you're there to make this thing become great, and that's really what I care about. We're all great friends outside of the work, but really when we're getting together, it's about the work.
And I mean, like, of course, again, I have to ask, the last official recording that has been published by Ohm was done in 2019. I know there has been this little thing like pandemic in between, but tell us something positive. Can we expect new music by Ohm at any point in the future?
Yeah, it's the record is being mixed right now. And it's really very, very close. I can't predict exactly when it'll be coming out, only because mostly the manufacturing issues these days are very hard to predict. It depends if it's getting cut in Canada or Prague. We don't know. So, but it's being mixed. So yeah, I feel like I can kick back, and it's actually going to come out pretty soon now.
Woohoo! Last question before we come to the infamous quickfire round, and there have been some personnel shifts for Grails over the last couple of years, over the last decade. And it seemed to me at a certain point, it was like a duo of Alex and you with very, very skilled professional musicians that you brought on and formed Grails, as if it was like a very core duo with a lot of close, befriended professional musicians. But given the fact that you've now been in the studio for the first time in like, what, more than a decade? Something like that? I don't know.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Would you say that now Grails, again, is a much more organic band than it has been for the last 8, 9, 10 years?
It is, in theory, on stage. Yes, it is on stage. It's going back towards the beginning again. But on record, I think it's still uh, intentionally very synthetic, and because I think we want to keep it in a place where we control the sound completely. I think when you're a bunch of dudes in a room and you hit record, there's only so much that you can control, and we want total control. We don't just want to be a rock band and hit record and release it. That's just not our job. But we've been recently playing some of the songs off the first two records, and those songs have really, almost for the first time, I can kind of see the organic nature of the early band as like its own planet with a lot of integrity. I really like the early stuff more than I ever did now as a listener. And so I see, if your question is, are we back to that level of organicness? I would say no, because the first two records are, the plan at the time was to never even really do overdubs, and that was a completely different world. That was not my world. I was all about overdubs because I recorded alone. But so those first two records, it was extremely jazz influenced in the sense that all you could do was just listen to everybody else playing. That was your major tool, was just listening and reacting. So no, we're never going to return to that. But on stage, we've been coming really close to returning to it. And I think these next two tours that we're going to do are going to be actually pretty shocking to us and some of the crowd, that we're going back to that sound, because I never thought we would. But I mean, now at my age, I'm starting to see the early stuff as a totally different form of beauty, and I miss it. I didn't know I missed it, but when we started playing Burden of Hope and stuff, it was so emotional. It was so satisfying. We want to play a lot of the early stuff now. And you thank the universe that when you didn't know exactly where you were going as a young person, you turned out these things that are still able to provide joy. And I mean, I know that Stephen Malcolmus and Pavement, I know when he steps on stage now as an older man and he plays those chords and he says those words that he wrote when he was 19, I know that it's got to be shocking when you look out at the audience and you just think to yourself, fuck, I am so lucky that I wrote something then that's better than what I can write now on certain levels, and I can strum it and it reverberates that emotion. Like there's a great privilege in being able to revisit your early life and still find those kind of pearls in the water. You know what I mean?
Definitely. So, Emil, first of all, thanks for all those details. And now we come to the part of the interview that by now a few artists are dreading. The infamous quickfire round. I will give you two alternatives. Would you like more the BBC or NBC, the Mets or the Yankees? There is only one answer to that. The Packers or the Vikings, Synthwave or classic synth pop? And you have to choose and give a short explanation for your choice. If you, for lack of knowledge, cannot make a choice, just say so. But I'm very sure that you, with such an eclectic taste and a very good knowledge of music, will be able to answer everything. Let's start out with a synthwave thing. Carpenter Brute or Perturbator?
Don't know either that well.
They are probably the two most famous European synthwave artists at the moment, Carpenter Brut and Perturbator. I'll send you a link later on.
Okay.
I would have not guessed to pick a hole there. Okay, with the next one, I'm sure you will be able to make one because of the synth sound of the classic 80s period without being too poppy. Giorgio Moroder or Harold Faltermeyer?
Oh, definitely Marauder.
Classical movie themes. The Bond theme or the theme for Mission Impossible?
I'm gonna have to go with the Bond theme for sure.
Because?
Well, I think it's more sultry, it's more evocative in the way that I could listen to it over and over on an island. You know, the Mission Impossible thing is like it's like getting beat up. It's like it's a little too sober.
Yeah, and I also agree with you. I think after like 2 or 3 repeats, the Mission Impossible theme kind of gets boring.
Yeah.
A little bit of synth influenced post rock. From Monument to Masses or Maserati?
I don't have those records.
Okay.
So I just wouldn't be able to comment.
No problem. Then Brian Eno versus, and I know I'm going to mispronounce it, Ryuichi Sakamoto.
Definitely Brian Eno. Definitely. Just because I feel like my personal connection to the vast amount of different sounds he's made, it just feels a little bit more, for me, it feels a little more varied over the course of a career.
2 sleep adjacent projects, or better said, 2 records by the Sleep guys. Snakes for the Divine versus Dope Smoker.
I don't have either of those records here either, because I don't want to be influenced by them. But Dope Smoker, I've seen them play so many, if I feel like so many times live, and I have a personal attachment to just watching them reunite, and I think it was 2008, and just watching that whole thing was really powerful all over the world when I would see them. So I can choose Dope Smoker just because I was there watching them play it a lot.
Mogwai versus Slint.
I don't have either of those records either.
Okay.
But I know some of the guys in Slint, and you have to understand, I didn't want to be influenced by the stuff, so I would purposely not buy it because I thought that I needed to be differentiated from these things. So I didn't want it to seep in to what I was doing, because I thought that I had a job to do. But I think my friendship with Britt in Slint is still really great and deep, and I love that guy so much. So I have to choose Slint just because he's my buddy.
As we've also spoken about movies in general and about 70s movies, now not talking about the soundtracks, but the movies. Friedkin's Exorcist or Carpenter's Halloween?
Yeah, I think Friedkin is a much more important filmmaker in certain ways, and he made most of my favorite movies from that era. But when you put it that way, I like Halloween better.
Okay.
I think Halloween is accidentally one of the greatest films ever made. I don't know that he knew that it was going to be that good. It's unbelievably perfect in so many ways, but overall, I'd say Friedkin is a much better filmmaker in a lot of ways.
When talking about movie accidents, do you know why Psycho was filmed in black and white?
I can't remember.
He didn't have enough money for color.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And I think the movie wouldn't work in a colored version.
Right. It almost seemed too happy or something.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
I got 3 more for you. Radiohead. You choose between Kid A and OK Computer.
Never owned them.
Yeah, but you know them. Of course you do.
I mean, I don't know them that well. I think I've always wanted to listen to Kid A because I remember when it came out, and I remember thinking, you know, I wasn't believing all the hype about like how electronic music was going to destroy all rock forms that, you know, a lot of people were
Yeah.
saying at the time. But like I would love to go back and reinvestigate that, because I think that Johnny Greenwood and those guys they're so intelligent that
Yeah.
I would love to like witness what they were doing when I wasn't willing to hear it the first time. But so I'd choose Kid A, but I've never owned any of those records. I mean, as I said before, you have to understand that my whole career I had a plan, and I wanted to make the records that I've made. And I thought that if I listened to all these people that you're mentioning, it would just water me down, you know?
Let's go back to a period a little earlier in your time. The Circle Jerks or Bad Religion?
Well, that's a funny one. I would say that as a 12-year-old or whatever, Bad Religion, I think it was one of my favorite bands. And How Could Hell Be Any Worse is still one of my favorite records from that time. It's such an early pioneering record. But the Circle Jerks strangely seem more important to me now, because partially just even the way that Lucky plays drums is so insane and so ferocious. Bad Religion would never do that. You know, that wasn't really what Bad Religion were doing. It's not really fair to compare them, but I think that Circle Jerks had a role. Keith Morris as a power is such a meteor. I mean, there's something about Circle Jerks that's just more, it's more of like a comet just exploding on your planet, versus Bad Religion, which is pretty organized, even more commercial feat, you know. So I love both, but I think Circle Jerks is what I'd put on right now.
And the last one, going back to German music from the 70s. And I didn't want to give you something like Can or Kraftwerk. Popol Vuh versus Cluster.
I mean, honestly, that is almost an impossible tie, because both things are such revelations. Like, neither of them are less of a pioneering realization.
No.
Both of them are perfectly curious. They don't know exactly where they're going. I think on a level of re-listenability, which is really important, I think that Cluster changed my life. Like, and I will for the rest of my life be obsessed with chasing that feeling they give you. So I want to choose them, but Popol Vuh is so unique, and no one is ever going to sound like them. There's no possible way that you can even get to that space and time and mentality that they're inside of. So really, it's technically a perfect tie, but I'll give Cluster the edge because of just total re-listenability.
A very good explanation. Emil, thanks for all your time. Thanks for the very, very interesting answers. And I hope that everybody by now has listened, when this one comes out, has listened to the new record, because I myself think that Anches and Maat is I don't want to say wonderful, but it's a really brilliant record. It has a lot of subdued atmosphere, but there's always like that little subliminal fret that I like. It has a lot of sparkly bits in it. And the way that the guys have done it is really, really cool, because, you know, getting back together after a while is important. So I hope that everybody listened to the record. I hope that everybody likes and loves the record. If you like what we do here at the Veil of Sound, then maybe give us a subscription here on YouTube or follow us on our socials on Instagram or on Facebook. If you want to do a little bit more, then go to our Patreon and check out how to support us a little bit. And now, Emil, for you, your chance for final last words.
I'm enjoying cooking, so I've decided to turn over a new leaf and explore new omelet recipes. So that's what I'm going to go do right now.
So make a plate ready for me. I'll be there in 5.
All right.
Enjoy the rest of your day, man. Bye.
I'll talk to you soon. Thanks, man.
Yeah, talk to you soon. Bye.